Hi there, welcome back to IndyCar on Sunday the 10th of March. Today's IndyCar really has a theme of, well, I'm calling it the 3Fs, which are things like, well, let's see, what are the 3Fs I was having in mind today? Oh, goodness me, yeah, fires, farms and foreign affairs. Now the fire I'm referring to actually is something which occurred just in the last few days to the ill-fated aircraft carrier, the flagship of the United Kingdom's naval fleet, the Queen Elizabeth, which is currently on its way to Rosyth via a rather strange route, I have to say. The report in the I'd say the defence magazines this week says that the Queen Elizabeth was visiting Glen Mallon, which is actually in Loch Long, which is really on the wrong side of Scotland if you want to go to Rosyth. The question is, what was the Queen Elizabeth doing in Loch Long in the first place? Well, to answer that question, it's pretty simple. Before this ship can go anywhere near Rosyth, which of course is very close to the capital of Scotland, Edinburgh, it has to disarm itself. Basically, you have to get rid of all the ammunition that it's carrying and offload it onto the shore. From there, it would be taken, presumably, from Glen Mallon over to Coalport, which is where the Royal Navy has its arsenal. When I say its arsenal, I mean its arsenal of everything, including torpedoes and gun ammunition and missiles and nuclear warheads, the works. Now, the significance of Glen Mallon was, I think, to many people probably unknown. I didn't realise actually that there was a facility there where they could offload anything at all, especially from an aircraft carrier. However, the story is that the Queen Elizabeth was offloading its ammunition at Glen Mallon, and a fire broke out, an internal fire within the ship. Now, according to the Royal Navy, that fire was very quickly contained and extinguished by the fire crews aboard the Queen Elizabeth. But it's yet another woe, another major incident involving this colossal ship, which the Royal Navy, I'm sure, would have found deeply embarrassing, considering the huge amounts of money that have been lavished on both the new aircraft carriers. Now, as you probably know, the Queen Elizabeth was destined to lead a NATO exercise in the North Atlantic, which is actually, I think, still going on as we speak. But it couldn't get out of port. Its starboard propeller shaft coupling had suffered some kind of failure, and so the ship was forced basically to steam northwards back to Rosyth, which is the largest repair facility available to take a ship of that size to repair its starboard propeller coupling. But on the way, it has stopped at Glen Mallon to offload its ammunition and other stores, and in the process, a fire has broken out. Now, you can imagine a fire breaking out during the unloading of ammunition would be a very serious issue, especially if it got out of control. Luckily it didn't, and the Royal Navy's firefight was very quick on the scene. But I think it's just an indication of just how dicey it is, where you have large military vessels containing huge amounts of ammunition and explosives, which are basically calling in at Scottish ports on a regular basis. Obviously, the British Ministry of Defence have positioned these various offloading points and these armaments depots and rearmaments depots and submarine bases deliberately in Scotland to be as far away from London as possible for a start. But in the case of the Queen Elizabeth, it's now going to have to try and reverse out of Loch Long, get back out down the Clyde, and back out to sea, and presumably round the northern tip of Scotland and back down the east coast, and finally get to Rosyth to have a propeller shaft repaired. But it's not a good look for Royal Navy, which has suffered a series of embarrassing catastrophes over the last few months involving both this ship and its sister ship. Anyway, moving on to the second topic, which is farming. And I noticed this week an English farmer, a woman farmer from England, who posted a video online in which she was alarmed by the fact that the British Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, or whatever it now calls itself, has decided on a new label, a new packaging message on British produce. And this simply says, "Not for EU." Now, you might think, well, okay, we Brexited, so maybe some of the British farm produce that's not destined for anywhere in the European Union has to be labelled that way. But according to this farmer, the reason why this label exists in the first place is nothing at all to do with the rest of the European Union, but is in fact the fault almost entirely of the Ulster Unionists, because they were the ones demanding that there be no border checkpoints between Northern Ireland and mainland UK. And of course Boris Johnson pledged that there would never be such a thing, and of course then there was. Anyway, she was bemoaning the fact that Boris Johnson lied continuously to the people of England about Brexit. She also pointed out that all of the Celtic nations representation, all the devolved countries of the UK voted against Brexit, and yet the farmers of England were encouraged to vote for Brexit because it was meant to make their farming easier, better, they were going to make more money, there was going to be global trade, etc., etc. None of which has come to pass. And in fact, she's now saying that the fact that her produce, which is not destined to go to the European Union, has now got a label on it saying not for the EU, implies that this type of British farm produce is not up to European safety or health and hygiene standards. Plainly something which she is extremely alarmed about and is affecting the sales of her produce. Also, she's pointed out the fact that European imported food, and a lot of that still comes into the United Kingdom, is not labelled in any such way. In fact, it doesn't say anything about where it should be destined for, including Northern Ireland, incidentally. It does not say not for re-export to the EU. So, British farmers, according to this one farmer, are very unhappy about the way Brexit has panned out. And she says that the lies have been just that. None of the promises, none of the sunlit uplands of Brexit, none of the international trading agreements that were promised have come to pass. And British farmers are now faced with an unequal battle against European imports, where their own farm produce is labelled as substandard for the European Union. Okay, so that leads us on to my final story today, which is foreign aid. Now, this refers to a story which has been going on and on in the UK press for some weeks now. And it's an insinuation made by Tory MSPs and MPs that Humza Yousaf is somehow connected with or is in support of Hamas or Islamic extremism generally or any kind of Islamic terrorism at all. Now, this is clearly an attempt to smear the First Minister of Scotland, and he's been fighting against this for his entire premiership. His family has suffered greatly as well during the Gaza operation, so we call it that, with his wife's immediate family being trapped in Gaza during the onslaught which has been going on since October. Now, the Scottish Government pledged, I'm trying to remember the exact amount, I think it was £250 million to the United Nations Gaza, basically the humanitarian effort in Gaza, which is known as UNRWA, up until the point where Israel claimed that some members of UNRWA were related to Hamas and were actually working for them, and 7 of them were promptly sacked. And are being investigated by the United Nations. And in the process of that, the British government decided to stop or suspend payments to UNRWA and requested that everybody in the UK, if they are making donations to the Palestinian relief effort, make those donations to other United Nations organisations working in the area. Now, the Scottish Government made its donation to UNRWA well before this all happened. It was all signed, sealed and delivered before any of these allegations against these 7 members of that UN humanitarian team ever came to light. And so there is no question that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, made the donation in good faith. And there is no connection between Humza Yousaf and any extremism whatsoever. And this is clearly an attempt to paint the First Minister of Scotland as some kind of terrorist sympathiser, which he obviously isn't. However, it highlights a problem faced by anybody of colour, anyone of a different religion who happens to be elected as the leader of Scotland. And it means that the British state finds an easy target. And unfortunately, Humza Yousaf, despite being an able politician and perhaps a perfectly good leader, is always going to be targeted in this way by insinuation and by the British press making these baseless claims without researching the actual facts beforehand. Perhaps it's an indication that Humza Yousaf should step down, not because he is bad at his job, but simply to remove himself as a target for the United Kingdom's baseless accusations in favour of someone who doesn't have any religious, racial or other baggage or any other affiliations, potentially family affiliations, which might make them a target for such lies. And it's entirely possible that that might have to happen eventually if this continues much longer. Nobody knows really how much damage the United Kingdom's press is doing to the SNP's cause. It doesn't appear, at the moment at least, to be having the desired effect. In fact, if anything, it seems to be generating more support for Mr. Yousaf than less. It also is doing nothing to decrease the amount of support for independence for Scotland. That is going on, and it's growing daily. I'll have more also to say in the next few editions about so-called direct democracy. I have contacts with people in Switzerland, highly placed individuals in Switzerland who have been working in Switzerland for decades and who are very, very experienced with Switzerland's direct democracy system. And that involves the public being involved with regular referendums or referenda on all topics which are of national interest. And it means that the government in Switzerland cannot get away with doing just what it wants. It has to do whatever the people say they should do in a referendum. And that has meant that, for example, recently in Switzerland, there was a government move to try to link the increase in the state pension to making the retirement age older by a year. That was rejected by the people in a referendum, and now the Swiss government is having to find the extra money to raise their own pension, their state pension, by 8.3%, and have to find the money to do that without pushing that pension out of the reach of people when they reach 65. And that's down to people power, and it's down to what's known as direct democracy, something which is planned for Scotland after independence. And I'll be doing a series of shows on how that would work after we become, or after we restore our independence. So you can look forward to a little bit more on that from me in future editions. In the meantime, I'm rebuilding the program's base. I'm trying to rebuild its follower base. I've included a new link in the description for this video. There is also now the inclusion of a question and answer session during these videos, which I'll be using a lot more of, which means that people will be able to ask me questions while I'm speaking live on the air if they wish to do so, as well as being able to rewind the video back to the beginning while it's going out live, and a whole host of other features. Anyway, in the meantime, that's it from IndyCar for this Sunday. I look forward to speaking to you again in the next few days. In the meantime, please keep following the show. Remember to reset your notifications. Make sure you follow the show, subscribe to the channel, and let's rebuild what was done by Facebook recently when they basically trashed the entire channel and reset it back to its factory settings with 0 followers, 0 history, 0 archive material, and basically set me back 10 years. Anyway, I'm not giving up, I'm rebuilding, but I need your help to do it. So I hope you'll stick with me and spread the word to all the rest of the independence movement to keep supporting this channel in every way possible to rebuild it after what was done by Facebook and Meta. That's it from me today. As usual, keep the faith, and I'll speak to you again later in the week. Bye for now.